Well now, are you settled? If so, then let's do our little trick. Leave your eyes slightly open, not enough to focus, just enough to let the room soften around you. Don't try to study the dark, just let it sit quietly where it is, and you'll find that the longer you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will come. Let yourself sink deeper into the bed beneath you. Feel the mattress take your weight fully, steady and still. Breathe slow and stay exactly where you were. And if you feel a slow breath of cold air pass across your face, even though the windows are shut, ignore it. As long as you stay calm and still, it'll move on by itself. Now, let's begin tonight's stories. At an Irish wake, people know what to do when they enter the room. They lower their voices, they shake hands with the family, they say they're sorry for the trouble, sorry for the loss, sorry that a good man has gone before his time. Some stand back and pray, some go close to the coffin and speak a few words to the body, as if the person inside might still hear the shape of the voice, even if they can no longer answer it. A hand may be touched. A forehead may be kissed, a rosary may be straightened. Then people step away and let the next person come forward. That was how it was in the Lynskey house on the night Rory Lynskey was waked. The coffin had been set in the front room between the window and the fireplace, with candles burning on the small table beside it. Chairs had been brought in from neighbouring houses and set along the walls. Women moved quietly in and out with tea, sandwiches, and plates nobody had much appetite for. Men stood in the yard for short spells, speaking in low voices under the shelter of the porch before coming back inside to warm themselves and pay respect again. Rory lay in the coffin in his good suit, his hands folded over a rosary. His face had been settled carefully. The barber had shaved him that morning. His sister had fixed his collar twice because she kept seeing fault in it where there was none. He looked older than he had a week before, but death often does that to a man, especially one who had carried worry before it took him. Cormac Marin arrived just after dusk. He came in through the back door like a man close enough to the family to know he needn't knock at the front. He took Rory's widow, Aileen, by both hands and held them gently. "I'm sorry," he said. "God help you, Aileen. He was a decent man." She leaned into him and cried against his shoulder. Cormac held there, eyes lowered, face drawn with grief. Anyone looking at him would have said that the loss had struck him hard. He had known Rory since they were boys. They had worked land beside one another. They had stood at the same bars, attended the same funerals, helped with the same harvests. Cormac looked every inch the loyal friend in mourning. He went to the coffin after speaking to the family. He stood at Rory's side and looked down. "I'm sorry, lad," he whispered. Rory's eyes were closed. Cormac reached out and touched the edge of the coffin. Then he drew his hand back and crossed himself. He stepped away as another neighbour came forward, an old woman who was bent low and spoke into the coffin as if passing along private news. Cormac moved to the wall near the fireplace. From there he could see Rory's face clearly between the shoulders of those gathered around him. The first change was small enough that he told himself he had mistaken it. The skin around Rory's mouth looked damp. Cormac had looked at the body only minutes before, and the mouth had been dry, settled, carefully prepared. Now there was a faint shine at one corner, a wetness catching the candlelight. He looked at the women near the coffin. One of them was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Another was speaking to Aileen in a soft voice, but nobody had noticed. Cormac turned toward the fire and rubbed his palms together, though the room was warm enough. A few minutes passed. More people came in, more hands were shaken. Someone laughed softly in the kitchen at some remembered thing Rory had said years earlier, then caught themselves and grew quiet again. Cormac looked back at the coffin. Rory's right hand had changed. The rosary still lay across both hands, but one finger had curled slightly under the beads. It had been straight before. Cormac knew that. He watched the finger. It stayed where it was. A man named Fergal stepped up to the coffin and said a prayer under his breath. His coat sleeve brushed the side of it. The coffin didn't move. Rory didn't move. Fergal crossed himself and went back to the chairs. Cormac swallowed dryly and looked toward the door. He could leave. Plenty had come and gone already. Nobody would think much of it. Then Aileen called him. "Cormac, will you sit with us for a while?" He turned back to her. "Of course," he said. He sat near her, close enough that she could reach for his hand when another wave of grief came over her. He let her take it. He said the right things. He told her Rory had spoken proudly of the children. He told her the parish would look after her. He told her she wasn't alone. All the while, the coffin sat across the room. Rory's eyes opened a fraction. Cormac saw it through the gap between two women standing at the foot of the coffin. The lids had lifted, only slightly, but enough to show a dark line beneath them, enough to make the face seem aware. Cormac's fingers tightened around Aileen's hand. She looked at him. "Are you all right?" "Aye," he said. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting that, because everyone in the house was tired. Someone began a decade of the rosary, voices joined in, heads lowered, beads clicked softly, the room settled into prayer. Cormac stared at Rory. The eyes were aimed at him. He knew it with a clarity that made the rest of the room seem far away. People stood between him and the coffin. Candles shook slightly as someone passed. A child cried in the kitchen and he was carried outside. Rory kept looking at him. Then came the sound. A wet splutter rose from the coffin, deep in the throat, thick and sudden. Cormac gripped the arms of the chair. The prayers went on. A woman at the coffin sniffed and wiped her face. A man coughed into his hand. Nobody reacted at the sound because grief fills a room with noises of its own. Cormac was the only one watching the body closely enough to know where it had come from. A pale fluid had gathered at the corner of Rory's mouth. Cormac stood quickly. Aileen looked up. "I need some air," he said. He went into the yard and stood under the porch with rain blowing in across the stones. He pressed both hands against the wall and tried to steady himself. He had told Rory it'd be sorted. That was the sentence that wouldn't leave him alone. Months earlier, when the bank papers had come and the debts around the Lynskey land had begun to close in, Rory had gone to Cormac first. Cormac had influence with the solicitor in town. He knew men who bought land quietly. He knew how documents moved and how delays could be found when people needed them. Rory trusted him. Cormac had promised to help. He had sat in Rory's kitchen drinking tea beside the same fireplace where mourners now stood and told him there was time. He said the final notice could be challenged. He said the family wouldn't lose the fields if they kept calm and let him handle the matter. Then Cormac signed the transfer papers behind his back. The land was worth more broken up than saved. A buyer from outside the parish had wanted it for months. Cormac had been paid to ease the way, to quiet Rory, to keep the family hopeful until the last legal door had closed. Rory found out too late. He went to Cormac's house the night after the truth reached him. He stood in the rain, shaking with rage and exhaustion, asking how long Cormac had known. Cormac told him it was business. Rory died 3 days later. People said his heart gave out. They were right in one sense. Cormac went back inside because leaving would have drawn attention. The prayers had ended. Aileen was standing near the coffin, supported by her sister. Cormac joined the line of people moving forward once more. He didn't want to. His feet carried him because every eye in the room expected grief from him, and grief was the mask he'd chosen. He stood beside the coffin. Rory's eyes were closed again. Cormac leaned in, close enough to whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time the words had fear in them. Rory's lips parted. Cormac stopped breathing through his nose because the smell from the coffin had changed. Flowers, candle smoke, and something chemical underneath. The dead man whispered, low enough for Cormac alone. "You signed." Cormac drew back so sharply that the woman behind him touched his arm. "Are you okay?" He stared at the body. Rory lay still, mouth closed, hands folded, rosary quiet across his fingers. Cormac nodded without looking at her. "Aye," he said. I'm okay, I'm fine." The coffin was closed before dawn. Still, Cormac Marin never again managed to convince himself the secret stayed inside. There are places in Ireland where strange things still survive. They stay hidden in deep water, old earth, thorn trees, lonely hills, and places where people stopped looking generations ago. And if a thing is going to survive, it needs somewhere suitable to live. A dark enclosure for something that hates the sun, cold water for something pulled from the sea, fresh soil for something buried once already. Most people never see such things, but every now and then, on a road far from anywhere, under lantern light and canvas, a man might pay a coin to walk among them. Cian McGrath saw the lights long before he saw the wagons. He'd been on the road since the previous afternoon, travelling west with a tired mare, a damp coat, and a hunger that had gone past complaining. The road ran between bog on one side and rough grazing land on the other. No house showed a candle, no dog barked from a yard. It was the kind of road where a man kept moving because something made the dark feel too interested in him. Then the music reached him. A fiddle mostly, slow and cheerful in a way that didn't suit the hour. It came drifting over the bogland, rising and dipping with the mist. And after another turn in the road, Cian saw lanterns hanging from poles. They surrounded a small travelling show set up in a field beside the road. There were 3 painted wagons, a canvas entrance, a row of iron cages beyond it, and a turnstile made from timber that looked older than the gate it had been nailed to. A sign hung above the entrance, hand-painted in red and yellow, "Wonders of the Irish countryside, night viewing only." Beside the turnstile stood a man in a brimmed hat and a long coat. He had a grey beard, a cigarette between 2 fingers, and a heavy leather strap hanging from his other hand. It looked like a strip cut from old harness, doubled over and dark from use. "What's all this?" Cian asked. "A travelling show," said the man. "A travelling show? At this hour? Are ye open?" Cian asked. The man took the cigarette from his mouth. "Wouldn't have the lamps lit if it wasn't." "It's awful late for a travelling show, though, isn't it?" "The best things wake late," the man replied. Cian looked past him at the row of lanterns. "Well, what's in there?" The man smiled, as if he'd been waiting for that question all night. "Nearly every wonder this country ever hid from decent people." "Nearly every wonder." "Aye," the man said. "Nearly." Cian probably should have kept going. His mare moved uneasily behind him, and he knew she wanted no part of the place. Still, there was music, light, and the promise of shelter from the road for a while. "How much?" "A penny to enter, no refunds if anything speaks to you." So Cian gave him the coin. The man turned the gate and stepped aside. "Keep to the path. Don't answer if anything calls you by name." That happens often, does it? Keane said. More than once. Keane looked at him, waiting for the laugh, but no laugh came. He tied the mare near the entrance and walked in. The first enclosure was low and green, built under a sloping glass roof. Shamrock covered the ground in thick patches. Small shrubs grew from mounds of black soil. Tiny stone walls ran through the enclosure like boundaries between little fields, and bits of brass and old coins hung from strings tied to thorn branches. At first Keane saw nothing. Then the shamrock trembled. Something ran beneath it, quick enough to leave a ripple in the leaves. It stopped near a stump with a rusted little hammer beside it. Two wet eyes looked out from under the foliage. The leprechaun stepped into view. He was smaller than a child and older than any man Keane had seen. His skin was the colour of dirty candle wax. His beard grew in grey patches along his jaw. He wore a torn green coat with buttons stolen from other garments, none of them matching. His fingers were long and busy, constantly touching his pockets, the coins, the soil, the little tools around him. He looked Keane up and down with open dislike. "Your mare's lame in the back leg," he said. Keane stiffened. "She is not." "She will be before morning." The leprechaun grinned, showing small teeth with black gaps between them, then darted back into the shamrock. The coins on the branches shook long after he disappeared. Keane moved on. The next enclosure was larger and colder. Mist clung to the ground behind a wall of scratched glass. A hawthorn tree stood in the centre, its branches bare and twisted. Beneath it sat a woman on a stone, combing long, pale hair that reached almost to the ground. The sign read, "Banshee." She didn't look up. Her comb moved slowly from crown to end. Strands of hair caught on it and drifted down around her bare feet. Small objects hung from the hawthorn branches, lockets, ribbons, rosary beads, a child's shoe with the lace still tied. Keane stood quietly. The woman's comb stopped. Her head lifted enough for him to see one eye through the hair. It was red from endless crying. Her face carried no rage. That made her harder to look at. She seemed worn down by sorrow older than the road outside. Keane stepped back from the glass, and the comb started again. A low cry came from her then, soft at first, and the lantern beside the enclosure flickered. Keane kept walking before the sound could grow. The water enclosure came next. The air changed before he reached it. Salt cut through the damp smell of field and canvas. A pool had been built inside a round pen lined with dark stone. Old ship lanterns hung above it. Nets, green glass floats, shells, and pieces of broken ore lay around the edges. The water was black enough to reflect nothing. This sign read, "Merrow." Keane leaned closer. A shape moved under the surface. It rose slowly from below, first as a pale blur, then as a face. The Merrow's hair floated around her head in green strands. Her skin had the shine of a fish belly. Her eyes opened wide under the water and fixed on him with a calm interest that felt almost polite. She surfaced without a splash. She had a wide mouth, and her teeth were small and close together. She rested both hands on a rock at the edge of the pool. The fingers were webbed halfway to the tips. "Come nearer," she said. Her voice sounded like water running inside a cave. Keane took one step back. The Merrow smiled gently, as if she'd expected that. "You would last longer than most." "I've no intention of lasting anywhere with you," Keane said. She laughed, and the bubbles rose across the pool, though her mouth had closed. Keane left her watching him from the black water. The next enclosure had no glass, only iron bars set into stone. Inside was a small mound of earth, a standing stone, and a coffin made of heavy slabs. The air smelled of old soil. The sign read, "Averthach." For a while, nothing happened. Then, fingers curled over the inner edge of the stone coffin. Cian stopped walking. The fingers were pale, narrow, and very strong. They pressed against the lid from within. Stone scraped stone as the lid shifted less than an inch. A mouth began laughing inside the coffin. It was a dry, patient sound. Suddenly, the leather strap snapped against the bars behind Cian, and he turned sharply. The owner stood several yards back, half hidden by lamplight. "Keep it moving," the owner said. "He gets lively near dawn." "Yeah, I thought I was wandering myself," Cian said. "Yeah, you are wandering. Keep moving." The owner turned away before Cian could answer. Cian continued along the path, though he watched the shadows between wagons more carefully this time. The Doulahan enclosure was almost entirely dark. It looked like a stable from the outside, chains hung from beams. A black horse stood inside, still enough to be carved from coal. Near the back wall, on a shelf, sat a head, a green, glowing head. Its eyes were open. Cian knew it was looking at him before he could see the rest of the face. The mouth smiled, slowly. A hand moved somewhere in the darkness below the shelf, though no body was visible. The head whispered, "Cian McGrath." Cian turned away at once and walked faster. The final cage stood at the far end of the field, separate from the others. It was built like a cottage room, 3 walls, a low roof, and iron bars across the front. Inside was a bed with a grey blanket, a small table, a stool, a water bucket, and straw spread across the floor. A fire had been painted onto the back wall, badly, with orange and black strokes. The sign above the bars read, "Human." Cian stared at it. The enclosure was empty. He laughed once quietly because the alternative was to admit he understood, and then he noticed the marks. Scratches along the inside of the wooden bed frame, more along the bars near the latch. Words carved into the table by different hands. "Let me out. Mother of God, I was only passing." The fiddle music stopped. Cian turned toward the path. The owner stood behind him with the brim of his hat low over his eyes, and in his hand hung the leather strap. "Welcome to your new home, lad." The leather strap came down hard across the side of Cian's head. It made a flat, heavy sound like wet leather striking stone. The lantern swung. The ground moved under him. The last thing Cian saw was the leprechaun standing outside his own enclosure with both hands behind his back, smiling as if he had won a bet. As everything went black, Cian heard the owner's voice somewhere above him, calm, almost apologetic. "Don't take it personal, lad. We've been missing a human for weeks." Now, this one isn't a ghost story, not in the way you might be expecting. There are no spirits at the window, no footsteps in the hall, nothing waiting at the end of the bed when the light goes out. But it's a story that's been told in places where the old ways still sit quietly in the background, where people still believe that not every lesson comes from the living. It's the kind of tale you hear when the day's work is done, when the light is fading across the fields, and someone older than you leans on a wall and decides it's time you understood something. Not something to frighten you, just something to steady you. And if it settles right, you might find it stays with you longer than any ghost ever could. Billy Joyce and his nephew Sam were walking the wall at the back of the farm, the same wall Sam had walked since he was small enough to need both hands out for balance. He was 12 now, nearly 13, and he had that way of walking where every step seemed to say he was already bored with the place beneath his feet. He walked along the stones ahead of his uncle, arms spread out, boots scraping over old lichen and loose chips of rock, while Billy walked beside him in the grass with his hands in his coat pockets. The evening was coming down gently over the joyous land. The cows were out near the lower field. A few crows moved along the hedge. The sun had dropped low enough to turn the wet grass gold in places, and every hollow in the land looked deeper than it did by day. Sam was talking the way lads talk when they're full of wanting and have nowhere to put it yet. "I'm telling you, Uncle Billy, I'm not staying here forever." Billy looked up at him. "Are you not, no?" "No, definitely not. I go bloody mad. Same fields, same roads, same people saying the same bloody things. I want a life." "Sure, don't you have one?" You know what I mean, Uncle Billy." "I do," Billy said, "but I enjoy annoying you all the same." Sam grinned and kept walking along the wall. "I mean a proper life, you know, money, a big house somewhere, maybe Dublin, or maybe London, somewhere where things actually happen. I'll be happy when I'm out of here." Billy didn't add much to that. "And I'll be happy when I have a good job, not the type when you're wrecked every evening and you're still counting coins. I mean, you know, a proper job, proper pay, and a nice place, and maybe a girl who isn't from around here and doesn't already know every stupid thing I ever did." Billy gave a quiet laugh. "That narrows the country down anyway." "I'm serious, though." "I know you're serious. And you never know, maybe I'll find myself a pot of gold while I'm at it. Sure, didn't Mickey Dunn's cousin say he knew a fella who found one out near Ballymore after following a rainbow?" "Sam, Mickey Dunn's cousin would say mass if he knew there was a pint in it for him." Sam laughed, then hopped down from the wall and walked on through the grass. "All I'm saying is I'll just be happy when I get somewhere else, when I've something, when I'm not stuck here." Billy stopped then. Sam walked a few more paces before noticing. He turned back. Billy had leaned his arms on the wall and was looking out over the fields. The sun was low behind the far ditch. The light had spread over across the grass in a long, warm sheet. It made the old land look softer than it was. Made the broken posts, wet patches, and crooked hedges look like they belonged exactly where they were. Sam waited. Billy kept looking out over the farm and spoke without turning. "Sam, you're making the oldest bargain in the world there, do you know that? You're telling yourself you'll be happy later. That's what I'll be happy when means. I'll be happy when I have money. I'll be happy when I leave. I'll be happy when I meet someone. I'll be happy when the work's better, when the house is bigger, when people admire me, when I'm not embarrassed by what I have, when I'm not looking over a wall at someone else's life and thinking theirs must feel better than mine." Well, it sounds sensible when you're young, because wanting more feels like proof you're alive. It feels like hunger. It feels like ambition. And some of that's good, don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you to stay small. I'm not telling you to stand in the same field forever and call that wisdom. If you want to go, go. Work, try, make your money, fall in love, make a fool of yourself, and come home, leave again, do all of it. But don't hand your piece over to some far-off version of yourself and expect him to give it back, because he won't, Sam. He'll only be busy wanting the next thing. You see, that's the trick. See, you think there's a day coming when you'll arrive at the life you pictured and something inside you will finally sit down. And maybe it will, for an hour, maybe for a week. Then the wanting will clear its throat and point further down the road. Better job, better house, better woman, better shape, better story to tell somebody. There's always another hill beyond the one you climbed, you see. And if you train yourself to only be happy on the far side of a hill, you'll spend your whole life walking past perfectly good evenings like this one as if they were nothing. You'll miss the smell of the grass. You'll miss the joke you made about Mickey Dunn. You'll miss your own young legs carrying you along a wall you'll one day wish you could walk without thinking about your knees. You'll miss people while they're still beside you because you'll be too busy imagining a day you'll be impressive enough to deserve them. And see, that's the part nobody talks about. Happiness isn't waiting for the end like a pot of gold. It's not buried under success. It's not hiding behind a woman's smile or inside a purse full of notes. It's a skill. It's a habit, a way of noticing. And if you don't practice it here, you won't suddenly know how to do it somewhere else. You bring yourself with you see. As the saying goes, everywhere you go, there you are. That's the problem and the blessing. You can leave the farm, but you can't leave the pair of eyes you used to look at the world. So learn to look properly. Learn to look without turning bitter. Learn to chase something without spitting on what you already have. Learn to stand in a field at sunset and know that this counts too. This isn't the waiting room before your real life begins, you know. This is your life. This wall. This evening. This ridiculous talk between an uncle and nephew. The crows there in the hedge. The cows standing like judges in the bottom field. The light on the grass. All of it counts. And if you can't feel even a small bit of that now, then money won't teach you. A city won't teach you. A woman won't teach you. They might distract you for a while, and distraction can look like happiness if you don't inspect it too closely. But real contentment, Sam, is quieter. It doesn't arrive with applause. It's more like looking around and saying, for this minute, I don't need to be anywhere else. That's all. 1 minute, maybe 2, and mind yourself, because wanting more is absolutely fine, but needing more before you allow yourself any peace is a curse people happily put on themselves. And what do they call it? They call it ambition. Just so you know. Billy stopped speaking then. The fields were darker at this stage. The gold had thinned out, though a little of it still held near the far ditch. Sam didn't say anything. Billy pushed himself off the wall, looked at his nephew properly, and gave him a small smile. He reached over and messed Sam's hair with one rough hand. "Come on," he said. "Your aunt will skin me if I keep you out here much longer. Bacon and cabbage tonight. Lovely." Billy turned and walked back toward the house. Sam stayed where he was for a while, one hand resting on that cold stone wall. He looked out over the fields he'd been so eager to escape. And for once, he wasn't looking past them. There's a kind of wheat field you'll find in parts of the country when the summer settles in properly. The crop stands high and thick, with the heads bent from their own weight, and the whole field moves in slow waves when the wind comes across it. From the road it looks calm, from the gate it looks harmless. Once you step into it, the world changes at once. The path behind you vanishes quickly, the sound of the road drops low. The wheat rises on every side until it walls you in. To a grown man, it reaches the waist, the ribs, sometimes higher if the ground dips. To a child, it can rise over the head completely. Light comes through in broken strips. The air inside is warmer. Every step makes the stalks brush and whisper along your arms. Children are drawn to places like that. They run into them without thinking, chasing each other, ducking low, laughing as they disappear and come bursting out again. They crouch down and wait to be found. They change direction without warning. 1 minute they're at the edge of the field with mud on their boots and mischief on their faces, and the next they're gone, hidden so well that even their own laughter seems to come from 3 places at once. To a child it feels like a game. To anyone working the land, it's a place where sight can fail you fast. Because once you lose track of someone in a field like that, calling their name may only tell you how badly you've lost them. Matty Lillis hadn't always been a hard man. There had been a time when people liked to see him coming up the road. He was a thin but strong man, useful with his hands and willing to help a neighbour with the cattle or pull a cart out of muck. He could be sharp enough when the work went badly, but most farmers were sharp when a day had beaten them down. In Cain's public house, after 2 pints, he could still laugh with the rest of them. His wife died young, and that softened how people spoke of him. They said he had been unlucky. They said he had carried it better than most men would. They said the boy kept him standing. The boy was Brendan. He was 7 years old, thin in the wrists, quick on his feet, and forever underfoot in the yard. He followed Matty from shed to byre to field, asking questions in a steady stream. He wanted to know why a gate dipped on one side. He wanted to know why the old cow favoured one leg. He wanted to know if foxes could understand curses because his father threw enough of them over the hedges to educate every fox in the parish. Matty would snap at him for show, but there was pride behind it. "Keep back from it now," Matty would say when Brendan came too close to a tool or a restless animal. "I only had the one of you, and you're in enough trouble as it is." Brendan would grin at that and stand back half a foot, which in his own mind counted as obedience. Their farm sat outside the village on a rise of land where the wind had room to gather itself. The house was small and plain. Behind it were the haggard, the byre, the hen house, and 2 sheds with sagging doors. Beyond the yard, the fields climbed toward a hill marked by one lone hawthorn tree. Everyone knew that tree. It stood above the farmhouse with a ring of rough grass around it, and no other tree close by. In spring it came thick with white blossom. In winter it looked black and cramped against the sky. Men who laughed at old stories still gave it space. Women warned children away from it without making a performance of the warning. If cattle strayed near it, they were driven off gently. If a branch fell from it after a storm, nobody carried it home for firewood. Matty didn't talk much about fairies, and he had little patience for men who blamed every broken wheel and sick calf on the good people. Even so, he never cut that tree. He never tied wire to it. He never drove a post near its roots. The trouble that summer began with foxes. They came bold and often. At first Matty lost the hens. He found feathers scattered near the ditch below the yard. Then a young lamb was found taken from the bottom field, and the marks in the ground told him enough. He set snares. He set out late with a lamp. He fired into the hedge and hit nothing but leaves and darkness. By the end of the week, he was walking the boundary every morning with a face like bad weather. "They'll clear me out," he told Brendan, while the boy trailed after him with a stick in his hand. "They'll leave me with feathers and bones and bills." "Could we keep one if we caught it?" Brendan asked. Matty looked down at him. "As what?" "As a pet." Matty stared at him long enough that Brendan began to smile. "A fox," Matty said, "would eat your pet hen, bite your hand, and sleep better than you after doing it." Brendan considered that. "That's a no, so?" "It's a no with a fence around it." That was the kind of talk they had then. Ordinary talk, the sort nobody remembers until remembering hurts. Matty eventually went to his friend Sean Hegarty, who lived 3 miles away and kept hunting dogs. Sean had used them for foxes more than once. They were lean animals, quick across rough ground, with narrow heads and bright eyes. They were used to work, not affection. They were kept apart from children, and no child was encouraged to put a hand near them. Sean brought them over on the back of a cart on a dry afternoon. There were 4 of them, all muscle and tension, pulling hard when they were led down into Matty's yard. Brendan watched from near the pump with his fingers wrapped around the handle. "Are they fierce?" he asked. "Well, they're working dogs. Stay back from them now." "I am back." "Back further," Matty said. Brendan moved one step, then another, and kept watching. The dogs paced in the shade by the shed. They took no notice of him in any friendly way. Their noses worked, their ears lifted at every sound from the fields. When a hen clucked near the wall, all 4 heads turned together. Matty kept them tied that evening and gave them water. He wanted them sharp for morning. He fed them light, less than Brendan thought decent, and the boy said so. "They'll be hungry, though." "That's the idea, lad." Brendan, confused, said, "Well, that seems mean." Matty was tired, and the foxes had cost him money he couldn't spare. "When you're running a farm, you can feed foxes or you can feed yourself. You'll learn that in time." The boy said nothing more, but he looked at the dogs for a while before going in. The next day came warm and clear. The wheat in the upper field stood high, and Matty believed the fox had been lying there or passing through it to reach the hen run. He had seen the track by the hedge himself. He walked the boundary with Sean's dogs straining on their leads, each one pulling low and hard, noses dragging over the dry ground. Brendan had been told to stay in the yard. Matty said it while tying his laces. He said it again while taking the leads from the peg. Brendan had nodded from beside the pump, with a piece of bread in one hand and his eyes on the dogs. Matty didn't look back after that. He went up along the field edge, past the wall where the nettles grew strong, and around toward the gap where the fox had been slipping through. The dogs knew the place before he reached it. Their bodies went tight, their feet scraped. One gave a low whine that set the others trembling. Matty bent and checked the ground. The marks were there, pressed into the dust. "Aye," he said, "in there." He loosed the first lead, then the second, then the last two, together. The dogs went into the wheat with force. The crop shook around them. A line ran through it, then split into two lines, then vanished. Matty walked along the edge of the field, listening for the chase to turn. He expected barking. He expected the fox to break cover and make for the ditch. The wheat moved in patches, first near the hedge, then deeper in. A dog barked. Another answered. Then a cry rose from inside the field, high and terrified, and Matty knew the voice before his mind could make sense of it. He forced his way into the wheat. The stalks closed around him and dragged at his clothes. He shoved through them with both arms, shouting Brendan's name as he went. The sound came again, but shorter, swallowed by snarling and the heavy rush of animals moving in tight circles. Matty ran toward it. He stumbled and caught himself and kept going. The wheat opened where the dogs had trampled it flat. He saw Brendan's boots first. They were small, brown, and half unlaced, the same as they had been that morning beside the pump. The dogs were around him, breathing hard, mouths dripping red, their bodies still full of the chase. Matty drove them off with a roar that tore itself out of him. They scattered a few yards and stopped. He dropped to his knees beside the flattened wheat. He tried to lift the boy, then stopped, because there are some things a father understands with his hands before his eyes can bear them. He made a sound that carried across the field and down toward the house. Sean Hegarty heard it from the boring and came running. The village came after. People didn't know what to do when there was nothing useful left to do. They stood in the farmyard. They brought clothes and water. They sent for the priest. They spoke softly to Matty and to each other. Sean took the dogs away before nightfall and would never speak of them again with Matty's hearing. The funeral filled the church. The parish gave Matty all the sympathy it had. Men took off their caps and women cried openly. The priest said Brendan had been a bright child and that no blame could be placed on a father who hadn't known his son was in the field. People repeated that afterwards because they wanted it to be enough, but it wasn't enough for Matty. He stopped working the land in any proper way. Gates hung open, hens wandered, grass grew too long around the farmyard. He began drinking earlier in the day, and once he began, he didn't stop until his body forced him. At first, people forgave him. They made room for his grief. They looked away when he spoke roughly. They accepted insults that would have started fights from any other man. They told themselves that losing a child could turn the gentlest soul bitter. Matty did turn bitter, but bitterness was only the start of it. He became cruel. He mocked men who came to help him. He snapped at women who brought food to the door. He told one neighbor that their own children were soft and useless, and then laughed when she walked away crying. He accused the priests of liking funerals because they filled the pews. He threw a mug at Sean Hegarty and called him a murderer for lending the dogs, though everyone knew Matty had asked for them himself. After that, the village began to pull back. Pity can survive sorrow for a long time. It doesn't survive malice forever. Matty noticed the distance growing around him, and it fed the worst part of him. He drank more. He went looking for arguments. He stood in Kane's public house and watched men lower their voices when he came in. If they spoke, he took offense. If they stayed quiet, he took offence at that as well. Only the hawthorn tree still drew him in. He went up to it at night. Some saw him from the road, a dark shape beside the trunk, with his head bowed and his hands pressed against the bark. Others heard him speaking there when the wind carries its voice down toward the fields. He prayed to God. He prayed to the saints. He prayed to Brendan's dead mother. He prayed to whatever old thing might be listening from the roots of that tree. "Give him back," he said once, loud enough for a passing man to hear. The man hurried on and told nobody until years after. The night Kane's public house burned, Matty had been drinking since before dusk. By 10 o'clock he was foul with it. He accused Sean Hegarty of avoiding him, though Sean wasn't even there. He called Kane a coward for serving every man in the room before him, though a full glass sat under his hand. When young Tom Daly laughed at something said near the fire, Matty crossed the floor and punched him across the mouth. 3 men dragged Matty outside. Kane followed them to the door and pointed down the road. "Go home, Matty," he said. "You're barred from here until you can stand among people without raising your hand." Matty spat blood onto the road. "You'll bar me, will you?" "I will." The door shut, the sound of the bolt sliding into place carried clearly in the cold air. Matty stood in the boherine outside the pub. Light leaked around the shutters. Voices resumed inside. The village had shut him out, and in his drink-soaked mind it became one more thing taken from him. He came back later that night when the pub was closed and everyone had gone home. He went around the back. There were bottles stacked in a crate by the wall. There was a can of paraffin kept near the store for lamps and odds and ends. Matty took a bottle, filled it, and tore a strip from the bottom of his own shirt. His hands were clumsy, but they knew enough to finish the work. He lit the cloth from a match cupped against the wind. The small flame showed his face. He threw the bottle through the side window. The crash was followed by a soft rush as the fire caught the curtain and climbed. Matty stood there for a few minutes, watching it burn, and then he walked away from it. By the time he reached his own yard, the glow behind him had begun to brighten the low clouds over the village. He took the hatchet from the shed and went up the hill toward the hawthorn. The tree stood alone above the house. Matty stopped in front of it, swaying on his feet. I begged you," he said. The wind moved through the branches. "I begged every one of ye." He lifted the hatchet and drove it into the trunk. The first strike sent a blunt crack across the hill. He pulled the blade free and struck again. Chips of pale wood fell around his boots. He hacked at the tree with all the strength grief and drink had left him. The work took longer than he thought it would. The trunk was tougher than it looked. Each cut opened another raw mark in the wood, and each mark made him angrier. At last, the hawthorn leaned. Matty stepped back, chest heaving, hatchet hanging from one hand. The tree gave a final splitting sound and fell across the grass. Matty looked down at it, and whatever strength had held him upright went out of him. He dropped beside the stump and lay there under the open sky. When he opened his eyes, he was standing at the edge of the wheat field. The dogs were at his side. The sun was high. Matty stared down at the leads in his hands. He knew the field. He knew the heat. He knew the restless pull of the dogs. He knew the exact place by the hedge where the fox track crossed the dust. He knew Brendan was somewhere inside the crop, hidden from sight, waiting in the terrible path of what came next. No, Matty said. Brendan, come out, Brendan. The dogs pulled toward the wheat. Matty wrapped the leads around both hands and dug his boots into the ground. The animals strained harder. Their paws scraped at the dry earth. Their noses pointed toward a gap in the hedge. They had caught the scent again. Back, damn ye, Matty said. The leads tightened until the skin across his palms burned. He tried to turn away from the field, but his legs carried him along the boundary. He tried to walk toward the yard, and the yard seemed to draw no nearer. He tried to drop to his knees and pin the leads under his weight, but the dogs dragged him forward inch by inch until he was standing at the same gap again. The knot slipped. The first lead went, then the second, then all 4 dogs were gone into the wheat. Matty ran after them, shouting Brendan's name. The crop closed around his shoulders and face. He shoved through it, taking the same path, hearing the same bark, then the same cry. He reached the trampled patch and saw the same small boots in the flattened wheat. He fell beside his son. The light bent around him. The field drew itself back. The sounds folded inward. He was standing at the edge again with the leads in his hands. The dogs were at his side. Matty screamed until his voice cracked. It was about to happen again. He tried everything after that. He tied the leads around a fence post, but the knots came loose as soon as the dogs lunged. He threw himself across them, but his arms opened against his will, and they burst free beneath him. He ran into the field ahead of them, calling for Brendan, but the boy never came toward his voice. He tried to beat the dogs away with a stick, but when he drew his hand back, the stick was gone. He tried to close his eyes, but still saw every step. Each time the dogs ran, each time the wheat opened, each time the boots appeared, each time Matty arrived too late. When Sean Hegarty found him the next morning, Matty was lying beside the stump of the hawthorn tree. The public house was still smoking in the village below. Men were moving through the ruin with blackened buckets and wet sacks. Sean had come up the hill because he had heard of the fire, heard of Matty being thrown out, and feared what else the night might have brought. He saw the felled tree first, then he saw Matty and the grass beside it. "Matty," Sean called. Matty's eyes were open, his hands were clenched as if they held ropes. His arms jerked and pulled against something no one else could see. His boots kicked at the ground. His lips moved, and Sean had to kneel close to hear him. Hold them," Matty whispered. "Hold them back, hold them back." Sean put a hand on his shoulder. Matty twisted away and stared through him toward the fields. "Oh God, no, they're gone after him again. They're gone after him again," Matty whispered. They took him down from the hill in a cart. He didn't speak sense on the way. He strained at empty air. He called Brendan's name. He begged unseen dogs to heel. At the doctor's house, he tried to crawl under the table as if forcing his way through tall wheat. By evening, the decision had been made. His mind was gone from the world, and the world had no safe place left for him. They brought him to a place where doors locked and stayed locked. He lived on after that. His body sat in rooms with white walls and narrow beds. He was fed, he was washed, he was spoken to, but none of it reached him, because Matty Lillis never left that field. He stood there under the same sun, with the wheat rising around him and the dogs at his side. He felt the leads in his hands. He heard the rustle of the crop. He knew what was coming, and he tried, each time, to stop it. Each time he failed, and then it began again. Most nights I lie awake looking down the length of my legs beneath the blanket, toward the 2 raised shapes at the bottom of the bed. When I was a boy, I used to wiggle me toes under the sheets and watch the shapes dance like little puppets. Me mother used to tell me to stop making a show of myself and go to sleep. But I keep doing it anyway, just to annoy her. It was harmless then, 2 little humps under the blanket. Now, when I look at them, I think about the road. I think about the rain on the windscreen. I think about the bend after Culzean Bridge, and then I think about the rest. I'd been drinking that night. There's no decent way to dress it up, so I won't try. I was in Connolly's from 7:30 to some time after closing, though by the end I'd stopped looking at the clock. There were 5 or 6 of us in the snug, talking too loudly, laughing at things that wouldn't have been funny in daylight. Someone bought a round, then another, then somebody produced a bottle from under the table as if that made him generous instead of dangerous. I remember saying I was fine to drive. I remember the others laughing and telling me I was an idiot. One of them, Marcin Kyo, offered to let me sleep on his couch. I told him I'd work early. It was true, though it had very little to do with why I left. I wanted my own bed, I wanted my own house. I wanted the small pride of saying I could manage myself. The rain started when I was looking for me keys. It was heavy by the time I got to the car, the kind of rain that turns the street lights into smears and makes every surface look slick. I sat behind the wheel for a while, with the engine running and the wipers going back and forth. I remember thinking the sound of them was kind of calming. That should have been enough to stop me. A sober man would have known that. But I pulled out anyway. The road out past Culzean is narrow in places, especially where it dips after the bridge and turns along the stone wall. I knew that road. I'd driven it 100 times. That was part of the trouble. Familiar roads make fools confident, you see. You stop seeing the danger because you think the bend belongs to you. I kept one hand on the wheel and one near the gear stick. The car smelled of me damp coat and stout and the old tobacco that never fully left the seats. The wipers worked hard. The headlights showed only what was directly ahead. A wet strip of road, the wall on one side, the ditch on the other. I remember the radio being on low. I remember missing the first bend slightly and laughing to myself. Fucking idiot. That laugh stayed with me. There are sounds that carry after a night like that, and that laugh is one of mine. The father and his boy were walking on the left side of the road, coming from the bridge. I learned their names later. Michal Brennan and his son Luke. Michal was 38, Luke was 9. They'd been at Michal's sister's house and were walking home because the boy liked the sound of rain on his hood. That detail came out later in court, and I hated hearing it. It was too ordinary, too small, too human, too innocent. I saw them late. That's the truth of it. The boy had turned his head toward the car. I remember that much clearly. His face was pale in the headlights, and one hand was holding his father's sleeve. I hit the brakes. The car went sideways. There was a sound when I struck them that I still hear some nights, though it never comes back the same way twice. Sometimes it's a heavy thud. Sometimes it's glass. Sometimes it's the boy's cry, though I don't know whether he actually made one. The car swerved across the road and slammed into the wall. The front folded in. The steering wheel drove into me. The engine made a hard choking noise and died. I tried to move and couldn't. My legs were pinned under the dash, crushed in a way I could feel without yet understanding. Rain came down the broken windscreen, and for a while I could hear only water and metal settling and my own voice calling out. Then the first car stopped. A man came running to my window and told me to stay still. Then he looked past me toward the road, and I saw his face drop. That was when I turned my head. The father was lying near the wall, half on the road and half on the grass. The boy was closer to the ditch. Their bodies looked smaller somehow. Rain hit them the same way it hit everything else, without respect or mercy. People came after that, more cars, voices, a woman crying somewhere behind me, someone telling others to stand back, someone saying an ambulance was on the way. I remember asking if they were alive, and nobody gave me an answer I could hold on to. The guards arrived then the ambulance, then another ambulance. Men worked around me car. They told me to stay awake. They told me my name. They asked me questions. I answered some of them. I kept looking past them down the road because nobody had moved the bodies yet. They covered me hall first. A white sheet was taken from the back of the ambulance and opened out in the rain. 2 men held it above him, then lowered it carefully. It settled over his face and chest, and the shape of his head lifted the cloth near the top. Then they covered Luke, the little boy. The sheet was smaller, or maybe it only looked that way because he was a child. It rose over his face too, a little rounded shape under white cloth set lower on the road beside his father. I couldn't look away. I wanted to. I tried to turn my head toward the broken dashboard, toward the men cutting the car, toward anything else, but my eyes kept going back. One larger shape under a white sheet and one smaller shape beside it. The fire crew came after that. They brought cutting gear lights and voices that stayed calm because they'd been trained to keep them that way. They covered part of the windscreen with a blanket while they worked, but it didn't block the view fully. I could still see the edge of the sheets. I could still see the rain gathering in pools around them. It took them nearly an hour to get me out. That's what they told me later. At the time, it felt longer because pain does strange things to time. It stretches some parts and loses others entirely. I remember the smell of hot metal when they cut the car. I remember one of the men telling me I was doing well. I remember shouting at him when he touched me leg, then apologising because I knew he was trying to help me. I remember being lifted. I remember seeing the road from a higher angle as they put me onto the stretcher. The sheets were still there. That was the last thing I saw before they closed the ambulance doors. I woke in hospital 2 days later. My sister was beside the bed. She'd been crying, though she'd cleaned her face before I opened my eyes. The room was white and a bit too bright. There was a machine near me with a tube in my arm. I asked about the people on the road. She looked away, and that was answer enough. The left leg came off below the knee that night. The right one followed 2 days later after the doctors decided there was no saving it. They explained it gently. They used careful words. Blood supply, infection risk, tissue damage, future mobility. They spoke as if each word had been washed before they brought it into the room. I listened. I signed what they gave me. I did what I was told because there was nothing else left to do. The strange part came after. The doctors warned me about phantom sensation. They said I might still feel toes curling, calves cramping, ankles turning under the blanket. They said that the brain holds a map of the body and doesn't give it up too quickly. They were right about some of it. Some nights I feel an itch where no skin remains. Some mornings I wake certain my foot had twisted under the sheet. Once I shouted for a nurse because I thought my toes were trapped against the bed frame. She came in, lifted the blanket and looked at me with pity she tried to hide. There was nothing there. Only the short shape of me legs ending at the knees. I learned to stop calling. I learned to lie still and wait for the sensations to pass. But the doctors never explained the shapes at the bottom of the bed, because When the room's dark enough, I still see the two bumps beneath the blanket, one larger than the other, exactly the same as the father and son beneath the white sheets at the roadside that night. And lately, whenever I stare at them long enough, it looks as though they're breathing beneath the cover. When you wake in the morning, please like, subscribe, and leave a small comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Those quiet words and clicks are what keep this place alive. The soft signs that let the stories return again and again to you and to others. Come back every night. Let this be your resting place. Good night.